Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Willard Preacher podcast. We are really pleased to have a guest this time. This is a young guy named Kunal, who is a graduate of Penn State, knew Gary from his time out at Willard. I believe he graduated in 2014. So he comes in a long line of intelligent debaters of Gary over the years. So we're really pleased to have him on. We're going to essentially have a bit of a debate through the course of this podcast. But before we get sort of rolling on that, I just wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and give a little background, Kunal.
Yeah. So I'm Kunal. I'm a grad student at University of Arizona. But before I went to Arizona, I was a grad student I was an undergrad at Penn State. I did a double major in physics and astrophysics and a double minor in math and economics. And I spent many hours, many days arguing with Gary Kunal, aka the Willard Preacher, about all the topics under the sun, religion based. And so I'm very well versed with what Gary has to say. And I just wanted to, before we get started, thank you guys for giving me a chance to be on your podcast and to discuss these topics one more time.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of fun for us, for sure. Gary, of course, is an Orthodox Christian. He preaches from that perspective. And Kunal is an atheist. And so he's going to be sort of debating and defending his ideas from that background. All right. So the way that we're going to kind of run this is we'll have a series of topics. More than likely, Gary will sort of start out saying, okay, here's my position on this topic. Kunal will have a chance to respond, and then y'all will discuss from there. So the first topic then is this idea that as far as we can tell, man has always believed. So Gary, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, as far back as we have written records, anyhow, man has always believed in the gods, the goddesses, the supernatural. And to me, that's an evidence for God's existence. One would think, or I would think anyhow, that if there was no God, we could, and by the way, before written records, we really can't tell, right? So we're going back as far as written records are concerned. You would think that what we would find if there was no God, that if man, and we'll discuss this later, but if man could believe in God, you would see a slow, gradual evolution of that belief. So you'd see maybe, you'd have reference a little, community over here, and then another one over there eventually, and then slowly but surely it would spread because, people thought that this was better for their life or whatever if they believed in God. But when, as far back as you have written records, there's full-blown religions, that's more what you would expect to see if there was a God who created us to believe in him and to know that he existed. Doesn't mean that we would always agree as to who he was, because as human beings, we can get things wrong. But that natural tendency to believe that we see all through history makes more sense to me if there's a God who created us to know that he exists than if there's no God. It's a godless universe. We're godless people. And yet somehow we have this propensity to believe in God. To me, if that could happen, that would take a very, very long time. And we should see that very, very slow, gradual evolution. But when we don't, when we see it, boom, right there, right from the beginning, at least as far as we know. And to me, that speaks volumes as to man's natural propensity to believe, which would come from a God who created us. All right.
So that's a good introduction, and I think before we even have our debate, you have to decide what we already agree upon. And I think it goes without saying, if you just look at the track record of history, undoubtedly, humanity has always had a track record of believing in God. So none of that I'm going to argue. None of that I'm not going to come up with any kind of examples that are really going to counter that. And I'm sure there's few societies that probably didn't believe, but I'm willing to completely concede that the vast majority of humans and cultures did believe in some sort of God, did believe in some sort of supernatural. Now, the question is, there's a leap of faith that you have to take over here, right? To say that just because humans have always believed, then necessarily God must be real. That is a leap of faith I'm not willing to make. Now, animals don't believe. There's no evidence that we have to support that animals believe, or that plants believe, or that any other living creature believes in God. So if we take this statement that humans have naturally believed, that doesn't necessarily mean that God is actually real. Now let's talk about what believing actually means, because this is obviously a very philosophical question, right? Now, in certain religions, they'll have a very, very abstract concept of God, and they'll say, okay, God is just the energy that binds the universe together, and they'll kind of use that as a cop-out. And if any of you guys have followed Jordan Peterson, he'll always say, well, it's true, but it's not scientifically true. It doesn't necessarily actually happen, but it can teach us some good morals of how to live our life. And those kind of Christians will kind of use this as a cop-out to answer the question of whether or not God is actually real. But let's talk about what this statement means, whether God is real. So Gary will say that not just any God is real, his Christian God is real. Jesus Christ was resurrected from the dead. So Gary and I can probably fully agree that the Hindu God is false, is not a real God. He'll probably acknowledge that Ganpati didn't actually have his head cut off, replaced with an elephant head, and that person is the same person, right? He probably will recognize that the Jewish God that rejects Jesus Christ is also the false God, and I've heard Gary say that. He'll probably also say that the Islamic God that rejects Jesus Christ is the wrong God. So Gary and I are actually in a lot of agreement that first, he already said that the majority of all humans who have ever lived have believed in God. But the second most important thing is that the majority of those humans that have ever lived that believe in a God, Gary and I can both agree that all of them have a false understanding of what that God is. They believe in something that we can both agree is not objectively true. The Hindu God, the Jewish God, the Muslim God, we can all agree that those are not true. So the question of whether the Christian God is true, even if I was to say that humans were all to believe and humans were right that there's some kind of God, that still wouldn't mean that the Christian God is correct. So to summarize my statement, Gary and I, he had a statement, and I'm going to completely agree with that humans have always believed. And what he doesn't say is that he completely disagrees with the beliefs of most of those humans throughout all of society. And I disagree with one more group of humans when I say that I think that God is also false.
Yeah, well, that's a huge one, though. That one is a huge one, right? The difference between 0 and 1 is huge. The difference between 1 and 30 isn't as huge as the difference between 0 and 1. And these things we're going to go over, they're not saying who has the right God. This is just, and these are not proofs for God. They're just evidences that point in that direction. So I don't remember what your view on this was, but many
Do you believe that Ganpati had his head cut off, replaced with an elephant head, and that person is the same person? Yes or no?
No, of course not. But I don't say that I came to Christianity through reasoning. Okay. I don't even say I came to God as a whole through reasoning, although I think you can, and I think these are some of the ways you can. Came to God through revelation, and I came to Christ through revelation, not through reason. What these are going to show is just evidences for God, because many atheists today say, well, I don't see any evidence for God. And I think what they really mean is I don't see any proof for God. This is, no, I don't remember, I'm not saying this is you, but many atheists I talk to, this is kind of the example I use for this. So Willard Building is on the mall at Penn State, and up, when I'm facing Willard Building, up to my right is Petit Library. So it's kind of, most of my talks with atheists, it kind of goes like this. I say, Petit is a library. And they say, well, I don't see any evidence for that. So okay, I'll show you evidence. So I bring somebody down and they say, well, I work there. Well, anybody could say that they work there. Bring someone, and he says, well, here's my colleagues. They work there too. Well, anybody can bring colleagues out here. Well, here's a paycheck stub. Well, anybody can create a paycheck stub. And we can go on and on and on like that. Here's a book. And it says Petit Library on it. Well, anybody can stamp Petit Library on a book. And after all of that, they'll say, well, I don't believe because you haven't shown me any evidence. Well, if you've shown evidence, that's all, those are all evidences. They might not mount to belief, but they're evidences.
Yeah.
So I have more respect for the atheist position if they said, yeah, okay, there's evidences for God. We don't deny that, but they don't mount to belief. And I don't expect them to mount to belief. I think that has to come from revelation. But I think when you see evidences for God, then you can say, well, maybe I look into this a little bit. And I think many atheists won't admit any evidences for God because they don't want to then say, well, then maybe I have to look into this. Or if they don't want to look into it, they just have to say, well, I don't want to look into it because I don't want God. So they have to deny all evidences.
So before I get into that, and I will get into that in just a second. So you fully agree, just to be clear, that Ganpati didn't have his head cut off and replaced with an elephant head. You believe that was a false story, correct?
Right. But the important thing is why I believe that.
So which do you think is more correct? The Hindus that believe this completely fictitious story, or me who rejects that completely fictitious story? We both, me and the Hindus, we both completely reject the Jesus Christ, right? But who do you think is more correct in your worldview? Me, who rejects all of the gods, or the Hindus who rejects the God that you believe is real, but believes in a false one? Which one do you think is more incorrect?
Well, I think the Hindu is more correct.
How is the Hindu more correct? What do you agree?
I was-
What do you and the Hindu agree on that I disagree with?
that there's a God. So there's a difference between saying there's God and no God. That's as far as the East is from the West. And saying, I think A is God, well, I think B is God. Well, you're both agreeing that God exists. You have a difference as to who the God is. You could both be wrong. You can't both be right. One could be wrong, one could be right. But you're at least acknowledging that God exists. So when you say, oh, well, I just believe in one less God than you do, as if that's a minor thing. It's not a minor thing. That's a huge thing. But the minor thing is me and the Hindu disagree as to who God is. It's huge for us as Christians, but it's much more minor than no God or God.
But what you're claiming about this, we're talking about reality, right? What we see that actually happened, right? So let's just take two events: the Hindus that believe in Ganpati and you believing in Jesus Christ. Me and the Hindu, we both agree that Jesus Christ is incorrect. Me and you, we both agree that Ganpati is incorrect. You and the Hindu have nothing in common about the reality of the real world, because you reject Ganpati, the Hindus reject Jesus. I reject both. You have more in common with me than you have with the Hindu, because as far as what's happening in the real world, you reject all of the Hindu doctrines just as much as I do. And they reject all of your doctrines. So they're much further apart than you and I are.
Well, I don't know the Hindu doctrines. I couldn't really speak on that. But that's we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that, I guess, because we don't want to get bogged down on this. But you think because I disagree on many of the Hindu doctrines and so on, that I agree more with you? I don't know if that's hard to believe. But even if that were true, it's hard to believe that I disagree with everything a Hindu ever said, or any doctrine a Hindu ever made. God created. We probably both agree with that. I don't know. I don't know the Hindu.
What do you define as God? Your definition of God.
We're gonna have. Let's say we do disagree on everything. Let's just take that as a premise.
Okay.
All right. I still believe that you're saying there is no God. So what we have in common is this natural, intuitive understanding that a creator exists, a God exists. After that, we may disagree on everything. Okay. But you don't acknowledge that natural, intuitive sense that is explained by the fact that almost everybody in the world has always believed in some sort of God or supernatural. That speaks to me as that's intuitive in man, that's within man, which is tough to explain if man is a godless evolutionary product of a godless universe. So if that's true, everything in man should naturally be godless, and his natural intuitive state should be godlessness. But that's not what we see. We see the natural intuitive state is to believe in at least the supernatural, and usually the gods and the goddesses.
Just for humans, not for animals or plants.
Well, we can't speak for animals and plants because we can't get inside their head, but we can speak for humans, right? So if you agree that most people throughout the world history have believed in the supernatural and the gods. That shows me that that's intuitive. And the question is, why would that be intuitive if we are the product of a godless universe, a godless evolution? Everything, we are godless, everything around us is godless, and yet we have this intuitive nature to believe in God.
what you're trying to do, and I think this is a common trick, right? You're taking God, and you haven't defined God yet, and I'm sure you will, right? But I'm sure the God that you define is going to contradict what Hindus call God, or what Jews call God, or what Muslims call God. And I think you've said this before, right? The God, it has to be the Trinity. So therefore, what the Jews, what the Hindus, what the Muslims, what the Buddhists, what all the other religions in the world are worshiping is not really God. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that they believed in God when you don't define God that way.
Well, because I see it as two different questions. The first question that we're really looking at tonight is there evidences for a God? Not a specific God. Not that does at this point, at this point it doesn't matter. What the Hindus will have a different view of who God is than I will.
Yeah.
But they believe that a God exists, or maybe many gods exist.
Yeah.
But we'll have a different view as to who the God is, right?
Yeah.
Which is a different question. I'm going to say the God is the Holy Trinity. They're going to say whatever they're going to say. The Muslims are going to say Allah. The Jews are going to say Jehovah. Whatever everyone's going to say. But that's who God is. That's different than that there is a God.
God? God is a three-letter word. What does that three-letter word mean to you? Like, how do you define that?
Just a very, very basic definition before we get to something like the Holy Trinity is God is that of which there can be no greater, right? So
is of that which there can be no greater. Okay.
Right. So that was just a very basic definition of God. And I would imagine that throughout the world religions, most would agree with that. Now, maybe some would, maybe some of the pagan religions wouldn't. I don't know. I don't know every religion, but they're going to admit that there's the supernatural out there.
Yeah.
If we can bring it down to that level. And most are going to believe in the gods, the goddesses, and everything. That's saying, okay, something supernatural, something greater than us, some higher power, as students like to say, is out there.
Okay.
And then we're going to disagree as to who that is. What I would say is, my point, what I just tried to state was that should not be intuitive to me. The supernatural, just the supernatural should not be intuitive to me.
Yeah.
Because man, if there's no God, it's just a very mortal creature in a mortal universe, no supernatural in existence, no supernatural anywhere. And yet here we are as human beings naturally saying, yes, something's out there, something's greater than us, some supernatural exists.
What do you define, just to be clear, what do you define as supernatural?
That goes greater than that, that's other than the natural, I guess. It's not.
What do you
just
define as the natural? Right? If God is real, if Jesus was resurrected, that'd be part of the natural, right?
Well, I mean, his human body would, yes, but his divine nature would be greater than that.
Sure.
So this. If you saw a miracle, that you'd think that was supernatural, right? It's not part of just the natural cause and effect of the universe. It's over and above that.
What I'm interested in is truth, right? So what I define as truth and what's not true. So if you're saying that what I define as truth is what you call natural, that's fine. But I'm interested in truth. So that's what I'm interested in.
Okay, so then and probably gonna have to go into the next subject here soon, but so how do you then explain the fact that man is purely cause and effect, natural, physical world, no God, nothing other than the physical universe, nothing above that, nothing greater than that, nothing spiritual. And yet he has this intuitive nature to declare the gods and the supernatural and the spiritual, the immaterial. I mean, it's intuitive in man.
There's a lot.
Why is it intuitive to a mortal man who is, just purely natural?
There's a lot about evolutionary biology that's not intuitive, that if we believe something, it doesn't necessarily make us, if we believe something false, it doesn't necessarily make us less likely to procreate. And if we believe something that's true, it doesn't make us more likely to procreate, right? I'll use this example again, right? You're a Christian, there's Hindus, there's people of all different religions. The ones who are the most correct, like what you would call the most correct about the religion, are not the most likely to procreate. If you go by sheer numbers, I think Hindus are the most popular, or Muslim, one of the two, are the most popular religion in the world. Just because they've been able to procreate and have the sheer numbers doesn't mean their beliefs are correct.
We're not talking about, right here, we're not saying that these prove anything. We're saying these are evidences. Mm-hmm. So the question still is, why does man have this intuitive nature to declare God if there is no God? He didn't come from God. It's purely a natural being, purely a mortal being, purely no God, no supernatural, no nothing, purely godless. everything's godless, and yet he has this intuitive sense that there's a God. Now, that's easily explainable. If God created us and said, I want you to know that there is a God, and then, okay, we can screw up from there. It's not easily explainable if everything is godless.
Humans have a propensity, not just through religion, through a lot of other things, to create stories in a way that animals, plants, all the other things don't. Humans have wrote fiction stories for as far back as we can remember. So you're going to say that humans have a propensity to believe. Humans also have a huge propensity to make things up, to make up stories, right? Like even in the Bible, there are things that Jesus said, this is an allegory. This is not true, right? Like, I'm just telling you this to teach you a lesson. Humans have come up with fictional stories for millennia, and most of the religions, almost all of them, have stories that even the people in the religion will call fictional. So if you agree that humans have a propensity to come up with fictional stories, including Superman and whatnot, then it makes sense to think that possibly humans came up with a fictional story of God.
Yes, but and yeah, we do come up with fiction. We have fantasies. We have, these days we have TV, we have movies. We know that those are pretend, right? If somebody is, I hope so. If somebody, like there was a time when Dungeons and Dragons was big, and there was a certain amount of young teenagers or whatever who began to think that that was real, and they began to act out as if that was real, and they weren't the best ones to survive in the world, right? But so the best ones to, so as far as I understand evolutionary theory, the best ones to survive in the world are the ones that are best adapted to the real world. So why then, if there's no God, would a belief in God allow us to best adapt to the real world if that's just a fantasy? If that's just a fantasy, we should be like those who are believing in the Dungeons and Dragons, and we should have, ceased to exist long ago. But seemingly it helps us to live in the real world.
So Dungeons and Dragons is an example that would probably prove your point, but I'll use plenty of other examples, even within Christianity. If we assume Christianity is true, and also that what you said about, surviving in the real world is correlated with or evolutionarily beneficial to those who have been, who know the truth. Christians speaking the truth throughout the first few centuries got murdered because it was not a popular religion back then, right? They died for their causes. They were martyrs. They were obviously considered heroes by the religion, right? But those are people who spoke and believed the truth, and they were least likely to survive. The people who are likely to survive are the people who are able to get along the most commonly with society and follow all the rules and not to do anything controversial. So when the society is largely Christian, of course, those who are Christian are going to survive the most. When the society was not Christian, when it was mostly pagan or any other religion, the Christians were the least likely to survive. They're the ones getting murdered the most.
Well, again, you're bringing it down to more of a specific than I was. What I was saying is that if this is a godless universe, and we are godless beings, and the best ones adapted to a godless universe are godless beings, right? Because the people who believe in God are living in a fantasy. And people who are living in a fantasy aren't best adapted to the world.
I disagree with that last statement.
But what we see in the world is that people who believe in God are the ones that survived and thrived and took over. Not the ones who didn't believe in God, which have always remained a very small minority.
The statement that I disagree with, the statement I disagree with is that those who live in fantasy are least likely to survive. I disagree with that because again, even you would say that the people who believed in a lot of other fairy tales that you would consider to be not true by your standard of the definition of the word truth survived. Now what you're going to say is that those who believed in God were the most likely to survive, and I'm going to say, well, those who believed in things that clearly what you believe to be objectively untrue, like the elephant head, right? All of the other things that you consider untrue about our current reality, about certain fairy tales, certain myths that you could, like the Greek mythology, that you consider all of that false, those who believed in those stories were most likely to survive. So what we constantly see is not the people most likely to survive are not the ones who reject fantasy. The ones who are most likely to survive are the ones who agree with the fantasy that the population around them agrees with. Even you consider those fantasies.
Yeah, but they're within the realm of God. So in other words, you've got a godless
What makes
universe,
Dungeons and Dragons different than Greek
godless,
mythology?
well, a godless people living in a godless world should naturally be godless, right? That should be their natural way of being, maybe a better way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's never seen to be their natural way of being. The natural way of being of man is always to believe in the gods. So
You said of man,
so
that you agree that doesn't affect any of the other species
we
seen.
We can't get inside the mind of a dog, but the mind of man, if he's godless and everything is godless, that should be his natural way of being, right? And it should be very difficult to even come up with a god. We'll see that a little bit later. Much less, as far back as we've written records, everybody's believing in God. Yeah. What you're saying is it's natural in a godless universe for godless people in a godless world to believe in God.
What I'm saying is the same.
And I'm saying it's natural for a godless universe for godless people to not believe in God. That's natural. That's what's normal for godless humanity.
What you're saying is that the people, the people that you say, oh, it's natural to believe in God, the same people believe in a bunch of things, not just about God, not even about the supernatural, about reality, what happened in reality. They believe in a bunch of things that you personally, and me too, but like you also would consider not just wrong, but blatantly false and unrealistic. And when I asked, you said, of course not, of course I wouldn't believe that, right? You agree that's ridiculous to believe that. You agree it's completely wrong. Yet you're saying that in you know, they've all believed it. And you think it's completely wrong, but you think it's beneficial to do that. So you clearly agree that certain things are beneficial to not to believe things that are false.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some things I'm going to disagree with and say that was wrong. But let's go on to the next one, because as we go down through these things, we'll see that very, very important ideas that allow man to thrive in the world come from his belief in God. All right, we're not talking about the other things that maybe you can disagree with and don't really matter. There's other things that matter very much, like objective morals. All right, I'm sure we talked about this back in the day, but there can be no such thing as objective morals if there's no God. And just to go over it for anybody who's watching who hasn't heard this before, but the reason is that morality is a concept of the mind. There's no morality bush anywhere. So there's no morality unless there's a mind that can conceive of it. So at the Big Bang, there's no morality. When the stars and the planets form, there's no morality. When the first cell forms, there's no morality because there's no mind there. First fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, since we can't get into their heads, I'm going to say that, there's no morality there. They have a brain, but no morality. Man comes on the scene. No morality anywhere. He just makes it up, makes up the concept, right? So if he just makes up the concept of morality, he can then make up the specifics, anything he wants. He can throw the whole thing out and say, we're no longer going to have morality, right? He can do anything he wants because it's just a made up concept. But when you look at the world in which we live, and this is one of the places I'm coming from. We can't see whether God is there or not, and if you haven't had a revelation, you're just trying to see is there evidences. And the evidences lie in the real world, and how man has always acted and how he's always gone about things. Whether he disagrees as to who the God is, what the specifics of the God are, is not as important as that there is a God. If he disagrees on some of the objective morals, isn't as important as he believes that there are objective morals. So virtually everywhere, every person, I would say every person, at least acts as if objective morals exist. So when you see somebody going in and shooting up an elementary school, killing a bunch of kids, your first reaction is not, well, that would be wrong for me, subjective morality. Don't know if it's wrong for him, because all morality is subjective. We happen to have a law against it now. That's just the majority thinks it should be wrong for now. That could change. So he'll get prosecuted, but he didn't really do anything wrong. Nobody thinks that way. The immediate thought is he did wrong. Well, that can't come from society because societies can be wrong. Doesn't make sense that it comes from the individual because he's doing it and he could just say, this is good. As soon as you say he did wrong, you're assuming an objective morality that's over and above humanity. Then that's good for everybody, no matter what. And that can only come from God. our whole justice system is based on objective morality. And nobody goes into the courtroom and they said, well, you're being accused of rape. Not that you did anything wrong if you raped. We're not saying you did anything wrong. We're just saying that it's against our laws. Maybe we'll change those laws tomorrow and you'll get out. But for now, we're saying it's against our laws. That's not the way anybody thinks. Everybody thinks, no, the rapist did wrong, right? But that's impossible if there's no God. But that's how we act. So as we go down through these, we'll see that man, whether he's just believing in God's existence or believing in objective morals or whatever else, is always acting as if God exists, even if he doesn't believe in God. Or even if it believes, even if people disagree as to who the God is, they're still acting as if a God that gives objective morals exists.
So I guess we're trying a new topic. So again, I'll start with what I agree with, right? Now, first off, I got to say that not even in current society, right? There's people are trying to push this idea that, that morality is completely subjective, and that trying to excuse behavior we would all consider, immoral for this exact reason, So I don't think it's too uncommon. And you say everyone agrees that it's bad to do this. Like, is it like, and recently, you see, especially certain political movements are trying to excuse crime and try to say it's okay to do this if you're a member of a specific class, right? But let's get back to the topic at hand, which is objective morality. Now, of course, a lot of what Gary said is correct. Yeah, if you have a godless society, of course, morality cannot be objective, right? Because what I consider moral is different than what Gary considers moral, which I'm sure is even different than what Matthew considers moral. And I think this is unquestioningly true. I'm not going to even push back on Gary about this. That morality is to some level subjective, right? But that is how the world works, right? Like, if you look at morality, like, why do we have political parties? Why do we have countries? All the countries have slightly different moralities from each other. All the parties within the countries have slightly different morality from each other. All the people within the parties have slightly different morality from each other. You can even go to Orthodox Christians, who you believe have the closest correction to the truth, right? And they'll have difference in their morality. I think this is wrong. I think this is wrong, right? You'll never see a monolith unless you have brainless zombies that just agree that this is true without, there's plenty of people who disagree on morality. So I'm going to say, even with a God, right? Even if you take God to be true and you say the Bible is completely true, you still have disagreements about what's considered moral and what's considered not moral. Now, I will say, if you have an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God, and you're taking that God as an authority, then yeah, that is the one exception where you can say that there's an objective morality, right? But of course, even within that, there's plenty of people who will say, I reject that God, I reject that morality, right? And you see so much crime, right? So many criminals think they're doing correct, right? Look at the Russian Revolution. Look at the Communist Revolution. They all thought they were freeing these people from slavery, but they weren't. They were creating an oppressive regime that killed hundreds of millions of people, all by thinking they were being moral. Karl Marx thought he was moral. In reality, his view was completely inconsistent with reality. My point is that the people who think that they're being moral often are doing things that the rest of us would consider immoral. And I'm sure a bunch of things, like what I would consider moral, I don't think there's anything wrong with earning money and keeping your money, Karl Marx would consider immoral. So morality has always been subjective. It always will be subjective in our current society. And for things like a school shooter, yes, the vast, vast, vast majority of people will agree that's immoral. But let's look at another topic, homosexuality. Gary will say that's immoral. Plenty of people consider that moral. How do you decide? Yes, you can use your God as a reference, but this can happen. People can commit homosexual acts, and the society as a large won't be like, whoa, we got to step back here. This is immoral. They won't agree on that. Only in the very, very, very tiny examples can Gary come up with, like a school shooter, where we all agree something is immoral.
Well, I think there's more than that. But when we're talking about objective morals, we're not, first of all, you kind of slipped up when you said Karl Marx is dealing with reality. That's a statement of objective morals. You can't say Karl Marx is not in reality, just make that blanket statement unless there's objective morality. My point is that we all act as if there's objective morality, even if we say that there's not. It's not an objective.
I agree with objective reality, not objective moral. Just to be clear, those are two different things.
Objective morality when you say objective morality, you're not saying everybody agrees on every single thing, but everybody has what they believe to be objective morality, and generally speaking, there's agreement. Where you can see the agreement is not necessary. Well, you can see the agreement just generally. Most people will say, don't rape, murder, pillage, and destroy. Objective morality means it's wrong for everybody, no matter what. So even if somebody said, even if the guy that rapes 2-year-olds says raping 2-year-olds is good, it's still wrong for him because there's objective morality. That's what objective morality is.
In our laws,
Right, so-
people can plead innocent for reasons of insanity. So
Okay,
clearly,
well, that's a different thing. But what I'm saying is, what the other place you can see objective morality is not so much what one person is willing to do to another, or society is willing to do to another society, but what they don't want done to themselves. So the murderer might murder, but he doesn't want to be murdered. The rapist might rape, but he doesn't want to be raped. The thief might steal, but he doesn't want stolen from. You can see in because people will betray their own morals oftentimes, but you can see when you say, would you want this done to you? They're going to say, no, they don't want that done to them. And it doesn't mean that we are in agreement in everything, but it means that everybody, unless they're, thinking this through all the time and trying to keep themselves from doing it, is going to say there are things that they believe that are wrong for everybody, no matter what. There's very few people that are going to say raping 2-year-olds is not wrong for everybody, no matter what, right? And the people that do are usually just the ideologues that need to say it to keep their ideology. They don't really believe it in real life. But as soon as you say there's one thing that's objectively true in morals, it's wrong to rape 2-year-olds no matter what, then you're saying there's a God, because there can only be objective morality if there's a God. We're not saying everybody knows for sure what those specific morals are, just that objective morals exist. So anytime, if you find in life, when we're done with this podcast and you go on with your life, anytime you think somebody else did wrong, just think somebody else did wrong, you're assuming objective morality, because you haven't asked them if it's wrong. You're not saying society says it's wrong, but society could be wrong. You're just making a blanket statement, you're wrong. Everybody lives that way. Everybody does that. So the way man naturally lives shows that he acts as if objective morals exist, even if he may disagree on the specifics, some of the specifics. He acts as if objective morals exist. They can't exist without God. We live as if God exists.
so I'm gonna, try to, stop Gary from using what I think is the Mott and Bailey fallacy here, where of course the Mott in this situation would be raping 2-year-olds and murdering and all that kind of stuff, right? But let's look at the Bailey. Let's see if he'll defend the Bailey in this example. So Gary believes, and maybe he's changed his mind, but I don't think he has, right, that homosexuality is wrong. And he just said that, even if somebody commits these crimes against other people, these sins, right, they'll still also believe that if it's done to me, I wouldn't like it. A homosexual, which again, Gary thinks is wrong, right, will have sex with another man, which again, he thinks is wrong. The homosexual is okay with another man having sex with him. So clearly, if you believe in Gary's objective morality completely, then that standard doesn't apply, right? It applies to the murderer or the rapist. It doesn't apply to what he considers sinful about homosexuality.
I think I made it pretty clear that people can vary on what they believe is objective morality, what this objective morality is. And I said, virtually everybody believes you shouldn't rape, murder, pillage, and destroy, rape 2-year-olds, chop up their body and send them to their relatives, right? They believe that's wrong for everybody, no matter what. Not everybody's going to believe that fornicating is wrong for everybody, no matter what. They're not going to believe necessarily that homosexuality is wrong for everybody, no matter what, or whatever. There are things that we will disagree on, but the point is that you can't have any objective morality at all unless there's a God. So as soon as you believe one thing is objective in morality, just one thing, you're claiming to be God. And you're trying to say because people disagree with Christian morals to some degree, that means objective morality doesn't exist. And that's just a falsehood.
I would say that I don't believe in objective morality. And I think you don't either, considering that you just said that people will have a disagreement on whether Christian morals are correct, whether fornication is correct.
Not all Christian morals, but some of them. The point here is not that everybody's going to agree exactly with me as to what the morals are, but everybody is going to have objective morality. Everybody is going to believe it. And if they say they don't, they will betray themselves when they see that news story that a 2-year-old was raped and their body parts were sent to their relatives across the country. They're immediately going to think that was wrong.
if you think that people can disagree and have different standards of what the objective morality is, that's just the definition of subjective morality. That
But
I have a
some
different
morals are subjective. Some morals are subjective. I didn't say every single moral is objective.
Okay, so you're
I
saying that
said
some morals
some
are
morals,
subjective. Okay,
some morals can be subjective. Pro-choice or whatever, that can be subjective. Not that I think
Okay.
it is. But
Okay.
even if somebody who's pro-choice on certain things, they're still going to have things that they're not pro-choice on. They're still going to have things that are absolute. And normally those things are don't rape, murder, pillage, and destroy. You know,
so what you're saying is that only certain morality is objective, not all of morality is objective, only certain.
Well, no, I'm saying that there are certain things, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with them, but there are certain things that people disagree on. But that doesn't mean that there's no, just because, let's just assume that there's subjective morality. That doesn't say that there's no objective morality. The existence of subject morality does not do away with the existence of objective morality. And if everybody believes in objective morality, like I said, just one thing, just raping the 2-year-old and sending his body parts to his relatives, just one thing that you say, no, that's wrong for everybody, no matter what. You're saying there's a God. And I would say that virtually everybody in the world says that that's wrong. I mean, I don't think you're going to, you may because you're an atheist and you have to. But I don't think that if we weren't having this debate, you would say, yeah, it's not necessarily wrong. You know, you're going to say, of course that's wrong. But the problem is, as soon as you say that, you have to admit that there's a God. And if you don't want to admit there's a God, you can't even state the obvious, right?
So,
that raping the 2-year-old and sending his body parts across the world to his relatives is wrong.
So you'll say that you'll say that like some morality is subjective, and you brought up the example of pro-choice, and you said that's a little bit subjective, right?
Well, not for me, but that's what I mean by
not
subjective.
for you. Okay, so now we're seeing a contradiction.
No, wait, that's what I mean by subjective. Pro-choice is what I mean. People will say, well, I wouldn't do it myself. I'm not saying it's wrong for you to do it. That's what subjective morals is. I'm not saying I think that's true with abortion. I'm just saying that's what subjective morals is. And that can exist.
Yeah.
And if that exists, that doesn't mean objective morals don't exist.
Yeah.
Which is what you're trying to say. You're trying to say because subjective morals exist, objective morals don't exist. And there's no relationship between those two things.
Do you agree that there's some people in society that would agree that I don't think that they think abortion is not just okay, but it's moral?
There's people that think you can rape 2-year-olds and send their body parts.
So clearly you don't believe in
objective
morality.
No, objective morality is defined as it's wrong no matter what, which means it's wrong even if there's a person in the world that thinks it's right, it's still wrong for them. Right? There's always going to be the exception that says, oh yeah, I think raping, murdering, pillaging, storing is great, right? But that doesn't mean that it is just because they think it is.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what objective morality is, and everybody has objective morality where they're going to say, even if you think raping the 2-year-old is good, it's still bad for you.
Yeah, and I think what it comes down to, and this is where we'll disagree a little bit, is that I of course think a bunch of things that are just obviously rape, what do you call rape, murder, pillage, destroy. I agree, of course, all of those things are wrong, right? But it is my opinion, right? I why is my opinion, right? This is my authority on morality. Why is that somehow superior to somebody else's, right? And for many millennia those weren't considered immoral, right? That those things happen more commonly, right? So why is my view on morality somehow more significant than somebody else's? Why is your view more significant than somebody else's?
Because
you can say it's because it's a God, right? But it's my morals versus your morals, right?
Well, the reason is because when you see somebody raping the 2-year-old and sending his body parts across the world to his relatives, you don't think that would be wrong for me, but I don't know if it's wrong for him or not. You're saying it's wrong. You're saying it's wrong for him.
Well, what I'm saying is, according to my standards of morality, that would be wrong for him. That's what I'm saying. No, you can't.
That's not what subjective morality is. Subjective morality is only good for the subject. You can't put that on anybody. Just like you said a second ago, you can't put that on anybody else. So when you see that guy raping that 2-year-old and sending the body parts, you can't say that person is wrong, because then you've gone from subjective morality to objective morality. You can't put your subjective morality on somebody else, because subjective morality is only good for the subject. It's only good for the person who is declaring it. It's not good for anybody else.
I'm not saying it's like, when I say I'm putting my morals on him, I have a standard of morals that I consider like correct, right? You might consider that wrong. Like, I'm sure there's certain things that we would disagree on morals. I would say this is morally good, you would say this is morally bad, right? And I'm going to say that as a free person in a free society, I'm allowed to think that a specific act is wrong, and you're allowed to think that the specific act is good, and vice versa, right? That's not us forcing our moralities on anyone.
No, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when the guy rapes the 2-year-old and sends body parts across the world, if you're going to be consistent with subjective morality, you have to say that he's the only one that can say whether that was right or wrong or not. Nobody else can, because subjective morality is only good for the subject. And society can't say it objectively because societies can be wrong. You talked about the Marxist
I think
societies.
we have two different definitions of subjective morality. I think this is where the hang-up is happening. When I say I define subjective morality, how I define it is that my set of morals is different than your set of morals. I'm not saying my sense of morals only applies to me. I would never say that.
But what gives you the right to put them on somebody else? You just said you don't have nobody has the right to tell you what your morals should be.
What gives me the right to free country?
A free country, you can go rape, murder, pillage, and destroy, just end up in jail.
Sure.
So, but philosophically, what gives you the right to put your subjective morals on somebody else who has their own subjective morals? Why do you get to rule over them?
How am I ruling over them?
Okay, then your subjective morals.
I'm thinking something or I'm saying something. I'm not ruling them.
Well, no, well, if you're saying that they are wrong, whether you can enforce it or not, I know whether you can force it or not, you're still putting that on them. You're still saying that that's true for them. Otherwise, you would just say, no, I have my own subjective morals. I can't say what's true for them. If they rape, murder, pillage, and destroy, that's up to them. I can't say that that's wrong. But as soon as you say that's wrong, you're putting your subjective morals, yours to come out of your head, on them, and you're calling them wrong for doing something that only you can say is wrong for yourself.
I believe you have the right to free thought, and I guess free speech is obviously that's subjective, but like I think you always have the right to free thought, no matter what happens in the society, unless you live in 1984, right? So they can do something that they considered wrong, and I can say that's wrong. I have the right to think that. Of course, I have the right to think that.
You have the right to think it, but you're not being philosophically consistent. If you want to be philosophically consistent and say everybody can have their own subjective morals, objective means right or wrong for everybody, no matter what. So subjective means for the subject, for the individual. As soon as you put it on somebody else, it's gone past the individual, and you can do it, but you're not being consistent with what you say about subjective morals. Of course,
that guy has the right to have his own morals. He can have his own morals. He can think whatever he wants, right? And I can think differently, right? He can do an action that he considers this is perfectly moral. He's allowed to think that. I can't control his thought. So when you talk about when it comes to the right to morality, he absolutely has the right to think whatever he wants to think.
That's not what I said. What you're doing is you're thinking that it's wrong for him, that your morality applies to him. Whether you enforce it or not doesn't matter. Philosophically, if you say your subjective morality is only good for you, then if you're going to be consistent with that, you have to say, well, I can't say whether he's right or wrong. I'm not even going to put up forth an opinion because my morality is only good for me.
Yeah,
that's what subjective morality is.
I'm putting up an opinion about his actions, right?
No, you don't have a right to put, philosophically, you don't, if you're going to say all morals are subjective, philosophically, you don't have a right to put your morals on him. You only have the right to put them on yourself because they're only good for you. As soon as you put them on them, you're saying, no, your morals are good for somebody else. And they're not, they're only good for you.
If we live in a subjective morality, how are you saying that I don't have the right? I can't have the right to do whatever I want to do.
Philosophically, you don't have, it's not consistent. Philosophically, it's only consistent to keep your morals to yourself.
If it's my, like, you're saying that like I can say that it's morally correct for me to put my views on him the same way that he thinks it's morally correct to harm the 2-year-olds. That's the same thing, right?
No, it's not the same thing because you're not being, I mean, neither one of you is being, no. If he harms the 2-year-old, he's being consistent because he's saying, my morality says I can harm the 2-year-old.
And my morality says I'm not the guy for doing that. My morality says it's okay for me to think that what he did is wrong, right?
No, you're thinking that, but it's not consistent with the concept of subjective morality. You're going past subjective morality and you're wading into the objective morality because subjective morality means your morality is only good for you. Your morality, meaning you believe it's wrong to rape 2-year-olds for you. You as soon as you say it's wrong for him, you've left subjective morality. Yes, you can do it, but you've left subjective morality. He's staying with subjective morality by raping the 2-year-olds because he says it's good for him. Yeah. He's not telling you can't be against it. He's just saying
you're telling me I can't be against it.
No, you can be against it, but you can't say that. You can only be against it for yourself. That's the nature of subjective morality.
I can say that I personally believe what he did is wrong. Am I not allowed to think
Yeah.
that? Am I allowed to think
You can
that?
think it. Oh, we have to
I can
go
think
on
it.
there
That's
'cause
all
we're
I'm
just
doing,
repeating
right?
this.
Now we can
No,
talk
you
about
can-
enforcing it later, but am I allowed
No.
to think that? That's all it means to me to
You're
be an
allowed to
atheist.
think anything you want, but just because you think it doesn't mean you're being consistent with your beliefs. When you think it, you're being inconsistent with your beliefs. We're not going to get anywhere with this. We're just going to have to
No,
let the audience decide, right?
I have to think about that more. I have to think about that.
Okay. Now, the next one is virtually everybody believes that life has meaning, right? Very few people, if any, can get up in the morning and say, well, another meaningless day in a meaningless world, in a meaningless universe, doing meaningless things, ultimately dying a meaningless death, ceasing to exist forever, and figure out a reason to get up in the morning, right? So virtually everybody has some sort of meaningful life. They may disagree as to what it is, again, but they're going to put a meaning to their life. And my contention is, if there's no God, there is no meaning to life. And so if we're all godless people, we should be comfortable with not having a meaning to life. Only if there's a God can there be a meaning to life. And it's very similar to the idea of objective morals. Meaning is a concept of the mind. There's no meaning bush out there that you can derive meaning from. So it's the same thing. If it's a concept of the mind, there's no mind at the Big Bang, or the first cell, or one that can conceive of meaning in the first fish, reptile, amphibian, reptile, mammal. There's no meaning anywhere. Man comes on the scene and just makes up the idea. Well, life really doesn't have any meaning, right? And my contention is, if we are godless people, meaningless, godless people in a meaningless, godless universe, it should be our nature to be meaningless people. And it's not. If there's a God who has a mind, who has created us for a purpose and said, this is why I've created you, this is your meaning to your life, then it's natural for people in a God world, at least that type of God, to believe that their life has meaning and become depressed if they don't think it does. Now, just to finish this up, I think I've only met two people in all my many decades out of Willard that I think honestly tried to believe there's no meaning to life. The one said, I'm still going to be an atheist, but I'm not going back to that dark place, which is obviously depression. The other one said he was currently depressed, because that's the end result of honestly, not just saying you do, but honestly getting up every day and thinking everything you do is meaningless. Now, you may say, some atheists have told me, well, there's no objective meaning, but I have my own subjective meaning. Okay, but why? If we are meaningless, godless beings in a meaningless, godless universe, it should be our nature to be meaningless. Why do we have to act as if there's a God over and over again in order to get along in a godless universe, in order to satisfy our godless selves?
Okay, so yeah, I agree. First of all, I agree with a lot of that, but there's one specific thing that I
So
want to
now you
focus
believe
on.
that God exists, right?
There's one specific thing that I want to focus on, right? He said in a godless world, there's you see, fish, amphibians, mammals, they don't really have meaning. They don't live their life as if there's meaning. Last I checked, they still don't. And God created these creatures, right? He created animals, correct? He's omnipotent, omniscient. So he created living beings that don't live their life as if they have meaning. So, now, of course, for humans, that's one specific species you can look for as an example. Like, out of the hundreds of million species, like 75% of all animals are insects. He found one tiny group of species, like one species that happens to not to believe in meaning and to live their life as if they have meaning, when all the other animals don't. And yet he's saying that that's proof that there's meaning. That's
because we're the only rational, at least as far as Christianity is concerned. We're the only rational creatures. We're the only ones who can think on that level, right? Mm-hmm. So the other ones can't, from our perspective. You may disagree with us. I don't know how we know. We can't get into the dog's mind again, but we can get into humans' mind, and we can know that we can think on this level. And we are, the way we think is we need life to have meaning, right? Or we get depressed. We can ignore it. We can say we're not going to think about it. We're going to be ideological and say life has no meaning, and then we're not going to think about it again. But again, getting up every morning and thinking everything you do is meaningless is not the way human beings were created to, or in your case, evolved, but I would say created to be. But if we evolved in a godless universe, we would be godless and we would be meaningless. by nature, and species act according to their nature, right? Dogs don't, I mean, there may be exceptions. You can bring up some weird exceptions somewhere, but by and large, dogs don't act like cows. Cows don't act like cats, right? Beings act according to their nature. So if our nature is to be godless, meaningless people, then we should naturally be godless, meaningless people. If our nature is a God and meaning, then we should have God and meaning. But time and time again, we have to act as if there's a God to best survive in a godless world. And to me, that's a disconnect.
So you'll say that, you know, if there was a God, if our world was godless, then we'd be godless people. Well, cows are godless, cats are godless,
But
dogs
they're
are
not
godless.
rational. They're not rational.
How
They
you
can't think
defining
on that level.
rationality? What? Like
They can't think on that level. They can't contemplate, is there a God or not? At least, look, if they can, we can't know it. So I'm
all
sticking
of
with
them
what we
act
can
as
know.
if there's no God. They
I
act
don't-
on pure instinct, on survival, on
They act the way they're created to act, right? According to the atheists, we're not acting the way we were created to act. Because we were created to be not, if we're godless, we weren't created, obviously.
Yeah.
But we were meant to, we evolved godless,
Yeah.
to be godless from the atheist perspective. You can't talk about the animals because we can't get inside their head. We can't know that they can think on that level. So we can only get inside the head of the ones we know, and that's us. And we know that if there's no God, there's no meaning. And yet we naturally act as if the world has to have meaning or we're going to get depressed.
Yeah. So first, I'll say I want to fully agree that if people don't have meaning in their life, they will get depressed. So I don't, not disagreeing with literally any of that part, and I also will concede that atheists are more likely to struggle with finding meaning than Christians, where the meaning is just given to them. So I'll concede both of those 2 points.
Before you go on, let's stop right there. And I don't mean to interrupt you. I guess I did because I did. But why do they have to struggle with meaning? That's the question. Why can't they just be naturally meaningless beings? If that's who they are, and species act according to their nature, they shouldn't have to struggle with anything. It should just be natural to be meaningless.
So in evolutionary theory, right, the traits that will get passed down, the traits that will survive, are the traits that are the most ability to adapt to threats and ability to survive. So if somebody is going to have depression, that's not a favorable trait. So of course the people who early on in humans evolution, that was most likely to have depression or most likely to be meaningless, those are not the people who are going to survive because they don't have the will to survive as much. So of course the people who have meaning are going to be more evolutionarily dominant.
So those people who act as if there's a God are more evolutionary dominant in a godless world.
Correct.
Think of what
Yeah,
you're saying. Doesn't it make more sense that those who act as if there's a God are better adapted to a God world, and those who act as if there's not a God are better adapted to a no God world? But you're saying those who act as if there's a God are better adapted to a no God world.
And I used this example earlier. If we assume we're living in a Christian world by your logic, those who were Christian in the first few centuries would be better suited to survive than those who rejected Christianity. But that's just not the case, right? Those who survive are the ones who are most likely to have similar beliefs to those around them. That's my statement, right? If your statement is that people who are most likely to survive are those who believe in the true God, then the Christians would always have been the most survivable. But that's not the case that we see.
Well, I mean, obviously the Christians survived and thrived back then, but that's not the point.
Not in the first few centuries.
You know, they did. A lot of them
got
were killed.
They were martyrs.
They were martyrs, and they kept propagating. But that's not the point. I don't want to get into that. It's a different subject. What was it you just said? You said that those who are those who are best adapt to the societies and how they believe. Well, the point is that why do they believe that way? That's not the natural, normal way to believe in a godless world. The natural, normal way to believe in a godless world is godless, right? And all that entails no objective morality, no God, no life has meaning. Yet time and time again, we see people better survive and societies better survive when they act as if there's a God in a godless world. That's not evolutionary theory. Evolutionary theory is who best survives in the world the way it is, who's best adapted to the world the way it is, not some fantasy world that doesn't exist. So,
You agree the Greek
say,
mythology is a fantasy world that doesn't exist. Everyone agrees with that.
yes,
yet those people who believed it were most likely to survive.
Because they all, as far back as we have written records, objective morals exist. As far back as we have written records, life has meaning exists, right? These are pretty constant throughout most, if not all, religions, all right? So, and they come from these religions, and they help us to survive, because the natural conclusion is they help us to survive. Godly traits help us to survive in a godly world, and godless traits help us to survive in a godless world. And yet you're saying godly traits help us to survive in a godless world.
Yes.
And I'm saying, no, that's not consistent.
Okay. Do you want to go on to the next topic, or I feel like that was...
All right, the next topic is free will. Now, this one is going to be interesting, because I don't know if we're going to agree on the premise or not. If we don't, well,
Okay, before you start, just define free will in your opening statement.
That I can freely make choices without any, in other words, when I make a choice, it's me making the choice. When I decide that I'm going to have, Raisin Bran instead of, Cheerios in the morning, it's actually me making the choice. There's nothing making that choice for me. I'm considering me, the person, I'm considering the options, weighing the options, and making a free choice. Nothing's forcing me outside of myself or inside of myself to make that choice.
Because this is going to be the question that comes up. What do you define as you? Who is
Well,
you?
look, I'm not you, right? So
I'm not. So I agree. I fully agree.
I don't
I'm
have
not the
a
one making the
philosophical
choice.
definition as to what me is, but
Yeah.
I know I'm Gary, and I'm not Kunal, and I'm not Matt.
Okay,
So,
I agree with that part.
And I'm making these decisions. Nobody's making them for me. That's basically, free will comes with a rational mind. Those two things go together. And from Christian theology, if you have a rational mind, you can make choices. You can think. In other words, a young Christian male is all horny all the time, right? And if he could, he'd have sex every minute of the day. And again, I'm sorry for those who are watching. If you have kids in the room, I'm a little late for that, but please, pause the button now. If he could, he would either fornicate or masturbate all day long, right? But ideally, for the Christian, and many Christians can do this, they say, no, I'm not going to do that. Even though their strongest inclination is to have sex, they say no, because I believe it's not right. Everything in them screams, or the great ascetics who have very little to eat. Everything in them screams, eat food. You need to survive. But because of their belief in God and what they think will get them closer to God, they deny themselves. So that's what I mean by free will. You're not just driven by that which lights up the lightest in your brain, that which forces itself on your emotions and your desires the strongest. Okay. Anyhow, so this is my contention, and if you disagree with the premise, then we can discuss it. We probably won't be able to come to an agreement on it. My premise is that if there is no God, the physical world works by cause and effect, right? So we, as humans, if there is no God, have no soul to overcome that. We're merely physical beings. So we're merely driven by cause and effect, like the rest of the world. So every, quote, choice we make is just our cause and effect line going back to the Big Bang or wherever, first cell or wherever, that up till today, that causes something to light up in my brain brighter than everything else, and I make that choice. I'm not actually making a free choice. It's all cause and effect. That's what I believe would happen if there is no God. If there is a God, the Christian God.
Yeah, wait, can I interrupt really quick for that?
Yeah.
I fully agree with everything Gary said. If there's no God, so I don't disagree with the premise. I agree.
Good.
I may have to clarify, but I agree with everything that you just said so far. So let's keep going.
Good. So there's no free will, but we all experience free will. So the atheist has to say the free will we experience, the common human experience, is we make choices. We make them freely. Even the Calvinists who say you can't freely choose God think you can freely choose your cereal in the morning, right? They don't say there's no free will at all.
Do you disagree with the Calvinists really quickly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Half the problem with Christianity is Calvinism, but anyhow, maybe more than half. But anyhow, our common human experience is free will. right? If you ask everybody, do you make free choices? Their natural reaction, of course I do. I made the free choice to come to Penn State, or I made the free choice to move to Arizona, I made the free choice to move to Texas, or whatever. That was my choice based on my reason. So I think once again, our common human experience, whether it's believing in God, objective moralities, life has meaning, or free will, is consistent with the existence of God. What the atheist has to say is each one of those is an illusion. God doesn't really exist, objective morality doesn't really exist, life has meaning doesn't really exist, free will doesn't really exist, and yet that's common human experience for the vast majority of mankind. So what we're saying is that Christianity better explains the actual world in which we live than atheism does. Because we don't have to say all the world is deluded as far as there's no free will, as far as their personal experience of free will. Of course, we're going to say some things are right or wrong, but some of these big major topics, we're going to say, no, this is because there's a God, and this is how we live. We don't have to say, well, you only think you have free will. So no, of course you have free will. You have a rational mind, you can think, you can make choices.
So I agree with everything you said about atheism, that we have the illusion about everything.
So now you believe in God.
No, I agree that we have the illusion of free will.
Jump
We have
the
the
gun
illusion
again.
of objective morality. We have the illusion of all the things you just described. But I'm that's only half the battle. Now let's actually talk about Gary's model, which he is trying to defend here, right? Now he says he rejects Calvinism, which to me makes absolutely no sense. Like the first thing you have to do if you're going to be a Christian is accept Calvinism, and this is a common like talking point.
Wait, time out.
What?
Calvinism came about in the 1500s.
Yeah.
So the first thing you have to do as a Christian is accept a belief that came about in well, I guess there were some others that talked about such similar to Calvinism before that. But basically, we have church father after church father after church father extolling free will, mostly because of fate. They were saying, no, there's no fate in the world. You're not fated by the gods or the stars or whatever. You have free will. So no, we would reject the idea that you have to be Calvinist to be Christian.
So, okay, before I get into that, I was just going to say, like, this is a very common trope, and you see Christians do it, and you see atheists do it, right? They'll be like, if God exists, then we can't have free will, and we do have free will, so therefore atheism must be true. I've seen Hammond to make that point, and I think it's completely BS. Like, I don't think in either the atheist model nor in the Christian model does free will exist. So I actually, like, will accept Calvinism, but I think Calvinists themselves, when you actually start to press them, they don't take it far enough. You have to be completely, I think Calvinism is inconsistent. I think you have to take Calvinism to its logical extreme, and that's Christianity. Christianity to its logical extreme is Calvinism, and Calvinism to its logical extreme is to completely reject free will. If you have an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God that exists outside of space and time, that means that when God created the universe, he knew every single thing that was going to happen when he created the universe. So when he created a universe, he knew that Kunal was going to form and eat, what is it, raisin bran, whatever you want to say, right? He knew that Kunal was going to do that, right? He knew Kunal was going to pick up his phone and do this, as opposed to turning it over and doing that, right? He knew that Kunal was going to do all of the things when he created the universe. He's an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God. So when he created the universe, there wasn't an option for me to do anything else besides what I did, because he could have created the universe slightly differently where I turned my phone the opposite way. So if you have an omnipotent God, right, it has to be that free will doesn't exist because he created it in a specific way where a certain series of events will pan out.
Well, that's not the way we see it as Orthodox Christians. I've heard some Christians say that, actually, and come some weird Christian doctrine to overcome that. But what we say is that God is not subjected to space and time, right? He created it. There was no space, there was no time before he created it.
Sure.
Therefore, he's outside of space and time. So he sees past, present, and future like we see the present. He sees it all at once, right? So he's not causing you to pick up that phone. He's seeing you pick up the phone.
Did he create me?
He created you, but he didn't. If he was inside space and time and he were to know everything, he would have to create you in a way in which he could predict everything you were going to do. But when he's outside of space and time, right? It's like if you're seeing this thing here, this play in front of you, and you're watching this play in front of you, and that play is past, present, and future. You're seeing every action of every person, past, present, and future, all at once, right? So you're not controlling anything. You're seeing everything. Knowing and seeing are not the same word, and they don't mean the same thing.
I agree with that part.
Right. All right. So your contention, and some Christians' contention, implies God is subjected to time, and he can only set you up in a way in which he can predict what you're going to do without fail. And we're saying no. God is just watching everything, not controlling anything. I'm seeing you right there doing everything you're doing. All right. I'm not controlling anything. I'm just seeing you. That's how God sees the future. He just sees it. Right? He's not controlling anything. So as Christians, we don't have to, because we believe in God, we don't have to believe in the Orthodox manner. We don't have to believe in that everything is, that there's no free will. You can believe in free will and believe in God.
That would be true if God was just watching the play, but he's not just watching the play. He created the play. He wrote the play. He created every actor in the play.
That's not what we believe. Yeah, he took he had a hand in creating. He created a hand. He had a hand in creating every person, but we also have a hand in creating, right? That's why we have sex, right? We have a hand in creating, and God has a hand in. Now, some would say that we as humans give both body and soul. Some would say we give body, God gives soul, whatever. Doesn't really matter in this case. But he did not create the play in the sense that he didn't write this whole scenario out and say, okay, now I'm going to create you and you're going to follow your scenario I wrote out. He created you, and your parents created you in concert with him. And now you can live any way you want. He just sees it all.
He created the universe from when it started, whether you think that's a big bang or not a big bang, whatever you think. He created the universe from when it started, right? So he has two options. There's two possibilities. One is he constantly interferes, or one, he just dropped the big bang or whatever you want to, whatever you believe in, and the universe let it play out from that.
No, there's a third option. Third option is he doesn't always interfere. Sometimes
he interferes, sometimes he doesn't interfere sometimes, right?
And what I'm saying is, especially according to the prayers of his people, but he can do what he wants.
Let's say in the situation where he doesn't interfere, right? Let's say that, like, even if he doesn't interfere at all, let's say he never interferes, right? He created the universe, and let's say he's just going to watch it, right? He created the universe. Again, he can see the past, present, and future. So he created the universe knowing exactly what was going to happen when he created the universe. He set the initial conditions as easily as somebody writing a code, writes the code.
It's not the same. Writing the code is causing.
Yeah.
Causing and knowing are two different words with two different definitions.
So
you can't conflate the two. You can't conflate the two. First of all, let's agree on that point. You can't conflate knowing and causing.
I agree. I fully agree.
Words are two different definitions.
Yes.
So when we say God knows, we're not saying he caused.
Yes.
The cause is our free will actions. He knows because he sees it all. But that's different from causing.
Yeah. Like, I know that if I when this thing is to drop, it's going to fall. Like, I can predict the future that way.
It's this. I know every action you just did.
Yeah.
From your shoulders up.
Yeah.
Because I saw them.
Okay.
Not because I caused them.
Yes.
That's how God sees everything, past, present, and future. He doesn't cause it. I didn't cause you to move back and forth and do whatever you did with your facial expressions and so on. But I saw you do them.
But that's applicable to you. But God created me. I
created my kids, and I see my kids do things, but I'm not causing them to do things.
No, but you didn't genetically engineer your kids every molecule by molecule. God did that.
Here's the difference. That's right. Here's the difference. The way that we as Christians get past the cause and effect of the physical universe is that we believe man has a soul, which is not material. So it's not subjected to the cause and effect of the material universe.
So the decisions in our brain, right? Like those don't make the decisions for us. Our soul makes the decisions for us.
No, the soul, in at least Orthodox Christian theology, the soul and the body interpenetrate each other. Okay. Right? We can talk about a distinction between the two, but we're not two beings. We're one being.
Yeah.
So you have the brain, and you have maybe what we might call the mind, which let's say would be the soul. Those two interpenetrate each other, and they're affected by each other. So if the brain gets damaged, the soul then that works through the brain is hampered, right?
Yeah.
But when the soul is freed from the body in death, it's no longer hampered,
Yeah.
right? But when the brain is working right and the soul is working right, they
Yeah.
work together, right? So, but it's not just the brain which would be subjected to the cause and effect. It's also the soul, which is not
Didn't
physical,
God also
not
create the soul?
subjected.
Didn't
Yes, but
God
it's
also
not.
create the soul?
But it's not a physical entity. It's the physical entities that are cause and effect,
But when he
not
creates the
spiritual
soul,
entities.
whether he creates the soul, the brain, any part of it, whatever you want to say, right? God created it knowing exactly what that was going to do. He could have created it slightly differently.
How did he know? How did he
What?
know? That's the question. How did he
Because he
know
exists outside
that
of
that
space and
soul
time,
is going
according
to
to
do
your
that?
logic, right?
Okay, so that's so he didn't cause it, therefore.
Well, he
See,
created it knowing that was going to happen. He could
but
have created it
knowing,
differently.
didn't we just say that knowing and causing are two different things? You're
Yeah,
conflating the two. When you say no, what's implied there is cause, and you're putting the
Yeah.
you're interpenetrating knowing and causing.
No, I'm
And you're
not. Okay,
saying
I
they're
want
the
to. Okay,
same thing.
I see why. Well, I see why you think that. Let me clarify my statement a little bit. If God if God created me as opposed to creating somebody else who looked very similar to me, but made a different decision about how to hold my phone, right? God has a choice. Which of these does he want to create? Does he want to create the Kunal that's going to hold his phone upright, or the one who's going to hold his phone inverted?
No, because
And he
that assumes
chose
cause.
one of those two.
No, that assumes cause. When you say which one did God create, the Gary that holds his pen in the right hand, or
Yeah.
the Gary that holds his pen in the
He has
left
to
hand,
choose.
you're saying that from the very beginning of God creating Gary, when he was just a little embryo in his mother's uterus,
Yes.
God fixed and caused every action that he was going to do from that point on. We say no, there's a difference between knowing and causing. So I picked up the pen with my right hand.
When do you believe that God started to create you? Do you think it starts in the embryo, just to be clear?
Well, at conception, I guess.
At conception, okay.
So, but he doesn't, at that point, he doesn't say, okay, now you're a living being, and I have created you, and I have caused you to do everything you're going to do from now on. He said, now you're a living being with free will, and you can do what you want. I know what you're going to do because I see it. I know it, but I haven't caused it. As long as we're not conflating knowing and causing.
Do you believe that God is omnipotent?
He can do anything he wants other than.
Could he have caused you to hold your pen in the other hand?
Well, sure, if he wanted to.
Could he have created an embryo that was almost exactly like you, but would hold a pen in the other hand?
If he wanted to.
So he could do that.
That doesn't mean he did do it.
You can say that, fine, he might not have done that, right? But he made the active choice of which Gary to create, the one who holds the pen in the right hand or the left hand. He had to make that choice.
No, he didn't.
Well, then he didn't make any choice at all, and it happened naturally.
Yes, right. So on the one hand, you're saying there's a difference between knowing and causing. Yeah. But every time you start to talk about God creating that embryo, you're conflating the two, because you're saying he created an embryo that could do nothing other than to pick up that pen with his right hand at whatever time of the night this is. And we're saying, no, he did not cause that. He knew it. And as long as you admit the difference between knowing and causing, and don't conflate the two, then you can say he can know it without causing it, because he's outside of time, because he can see past, present, and future all at once. We can't do that. We're subjected to time. If we were going to create a being and know everything it was going to do, we would have to program it from its beginning to do exactly what we wanted it to do. God's not subjected to time like we are.
So let me just ask you two or three yes or no questions. Do you think that God has the power to create a version of you that was exactly the same but would hold a pen in the opposite hand? Yes or no?
No.
Does he have the power to do that?
No, because it wouldn't be
exactly like.
No, because it wouldn't be exactly like me if it didn't have freedom. Right? He didn't have freedom. Right? So you're talking about creating a being that's caused, and comparing him to a being that's free. Yeah. And those wouldn't be the two. Those wouldn't be the same beings.
Okay, so what you're saying is that your God isn't quite omnipotent because he can't.
Right. There's certain things God can't do. Right.
Okay.
So an eternal God.
Okay.
Can't cease to exist.
Yeah.
Right. An omnipotent God can't create a rock he can't lift so heavy he can't lift, because it goes against the fact that he's omnipotent. He can't make a square circle if those definitions hold. Okay. Right. He can't go against his own nature. He can't go against the logic that he's created. But he could create different logic, I guess. But
he couldn't create a scenario that would make it so you would hold a pen in the opposite hand. You could not. There's nothing you can do in that situation. to make that
Well,
happen?
he could, no, because the implied in that, now maybe I'm not understanding, but implied in that is he creates a being who, when it got to, 9/13 on whatever date this is, July 31st, was going to pick up that pen and hold it. And he created him in his left hand, and he created him to do that.
Yeah,
He has to cause him to do that,
yeah,
right? He could create a being and know that that was going to happen by some odd chance.
yeah.
But, that's different than creating him and causing him to be that way.
He could have also created the same being that would have done the opposite hand, right? He could have done that.
He couldn't have
That's
done
not a
that.
violation of his power. That's not a violation of.
He couldn't have done that if what you mean by that is, maybe I don't understand what you mean by that. But what you mean by that is he created him to do that. And he created everything in his life up to that point that led him to do that. Versus he created a being and he sat back and he saw the free will actions of that being. And that being just happened to do that because of his choices in life, which is very unlikely, right? But you could say technically possible. But, as long as you're not conflating knowing and causing, then we might be able to agree on something.
Yeah, I
But,
do. I definitely agree. There's a difference between knowing and
But
causing.
the point, but getting back to the original thing, and we have to move on, so we don't have a lot of time for this. But since our common human experience, people see themselves as having freedom and making free will choices. Common human experience says that's what we're doing. And what the atheist has to come in and say time and time and time again is, even though we're acting as if there's a God, we're acting as if there's a God, and we're believing we're acting as if there's a God, even though there's no God. So we're acting in a God way in a godless world.
Yeah,
Or he has to say that everybody's free will experience, everybody's common human experience is wrong. Everybody's,
yeah,
except for the few atheists and maybe the occasional Calvinist who takes the, occasional philosopher that takes it more than he should. They somehow know that nobody has free will, but everybody's common human experience, they don't know that.
yeah.
I don't buy that at all. So,
Yeah.
all right.
No, I
so
mean,
if this,
I agree with a lot of the premise. I just wanted to say, yeah.
Okay.